Hello, scholars. Seen this question before? We've been talking about how effective communication happens and how it involves some of the elements you see here on the screen. We have an author who tries to communicate a particular purpose to a particular audience through some sort of text. And of course, all of this is happening within some larger context in a particular time or particular place. Now, last week, we looked at how an author might try to portray him or herself in an ad, in that case, a political ad. This week, I want to talk about audience. Now, you know, of course, that people are very different. Some are young, some are not so young, some are even less young. People have different hobbies, different preferences. We are not all the same. Now, what this means, of course, is that anyone who's trying to persuade us of something or communicate with us needs to take into account who we are as their audience. Now, this idea of having a particular target audience is really clear if you think about TV, where you've got shows that are aimed at kids and shows that are aimed at adults and shows that are aimed, for example, at teenagers. And of course, this idea becomes very clear when you think about advertising. I bet you can tell who the target audience for this advertisement is. And of course, online, there are ads, people who are trying to scrutinize us and our buying patterns, again, trying to figure out who we are as an audience for whatever product or person or idea that they're trying to sell. Now, when we write, of course, when we communicate, we have to be very conscious of target audience. But I want to point out that target audience, this goes beyond merely advertisements or television shows or beyond words on a page. For example, my daughter and I recently watched a Netflix series on interior design. And in the competition, the judge said over and over to the contestants that they had to think about the client. They had to think about the brief, which contained the client's wishes. Here was a case, if you look at this room, it's quite pretty. But in this case, the designer was criticized for thinking of her own preferences rather than the client's preferences. This is supposed to be a hotel room. And I don't know about you, but if I were a hotel owner, I would look at this room and say, this is going to be a nightmare to clean. And if I were a guest staying in this room, I would be wondering how many bugs were hiding in those curtains. Or here's another example, again from Netflix, when my daughter and I watched Next in Fashion. In this case, the designers of this little ensemble were criticized for making something that was too commercial. In other words, they were targeting regular people who might actually want to buy the clothes and wear them, as opposed to sort of supermodel celebrity types, which is what the Next in Fashion show was looking for. So you had a mismatch between who the designers were aiming for and who the people were who were judging the clothes. And of course, think about any regular communication. If you want to communicate properly, you need to think about the other person, their point of view, what they're expecting, and what kind of language or behavior is going to work in that kind of communication. So let's apply these ideas to some actual written texts. Let's say, for example, you want to be a children's book writer. What sort of things would you need to take into consideration if you're writing for children? Well, obviously, the content would have to be appropriate for children, and the type of characters you use might be different from those that show up in, say, a romance novel. Okay, you'd be thinking about what pictures would be appealing. You'd be thinking about word choice. You want to make sure that the children can understand the words. And you're also going to be thinking about word count. So here are some typical word counts for different types of books. And when you take these word counts into consideration, that not only appeals to the particular reader at that level, but also to the publisher who's expecting certain types of books to be certain lengths. And by the way, just a rule of thumb, if you do write for children, if you want to know a book's target audience, take the age of the main character, subtract 2 years, and that's typically about the range for the expected reader. Now let's say we're thinking about resumes, which we'll either revise or write later on this year. So if you're writing a resume, how do you target that to a particular audience? Well, let's say you're going to apply to a couple of different companies. What you might do to start is to go to the company's job applications, read through them, see what specific skills and qualities the company's looking for, and see if those are things that you could add to your resume, assuming, of course, you've got those skills and qualities. Now, you can also tailor your cover letter to that particular company. Maybe you know something about them and you want to mention that. That shows, hey, this is not generic. And of course, you tailor your resume to a particular job by including the skills that are specific to that instead of listing every single thing you've ever done in your life. Although as high school students, it's okay to list all the skills you got because, you just need to fill your page. Now, let's say we're talking about school and the writing you do here. Okay, target audience. It's a little bit fake, right? Because you're not writing for the real world. You're writing for a person who's going to read it and give you a grade. Well, that's me. So what do I like in writing? Well, I love it when people proofread and reread and capitalize stuff and do all that good stuff. I kind of like it when students are funny. And of course, I like it when they do what the instructions say and then show some depth of thought. Now, you guys are my target audience, and I don't know how often I hit the mark properly, but I do try to think about you and what you already know and what your needs are as I prepare my lessons. Again, that doesn't mean I get it right, but I promise you I am trying. Okay, a few things to think about here. What happens if you have a mismatch between a particular text and its audience? For example, let's take Shakespeare. Now, Shakespeare in his day was writing for regular people, and his plays were meant to entertain. He wasn't writing for scholars. And yet today we read them and we might have a little trouble with them because the language is now over 400 years old and the language has moved on since then. So I don't think it's an issue that Shakespeare was trying to be hoity-toity. It's not an issue of him being too intelligent for us. It's simply an issue of he's writing for people 400 years ago, not for us today. Now, you might consider something similar as you are going about your job. You're going to learn some pretty specialized lingo that relates to your field. And when you communicate with other people, you need to remember that they may not always be familiar with that lingo. So sometimes that may mean toning it back and explaining that computer technical thing that's going on there in terms that regular people, like me, can understand. Now, I'm not saying go like mansplaining all the time, again, but be conscious of who you're talking to and what they may or may not know. I don't want to say, though, that you're a slave to your audience. There may be times when you give your audience what they don't want, when you challenge them on something. And there may be times when you totally defy all their expectations and yet somehow manage to give them something that is terrific. Kind of like the perfect Christmas present you didn't know you wanted until you got it. So when you're a writer, some questions you might ask are, what's the background of the people I'm writing for? What are their characteristics? What do they already know or think about a given topic? What do they need to know? What will they find persuasive or entertaining or informative? A final thought. You and I, we are somebody's target audience. And it's worth thinking about the expectations they have of us as we view or read whatever the text is that they've created. Take this ad. This is a Carl's Jr. ad, and I had to search hard to find a tame one because most of them I would be embarrassed to put on the screen. They feature women who are wearing not a lot of clothing, who are eating burgers in a very lascivious way. Now, I don't know what was going through those advertisers' mind, but I think they had certain expectations of me as someone viewing this ad, and in my case, I think those expectations were wrong. Now, think, if you will, about a politician talking to you. Are they expecting you to be the kind of person who will blindly swallow anything? Or are they expecting you to be someone who is going to be thoughtful, to analyze their arguments, to fact check what they say? And I think most texts, I hate this cough. Most writers have a sort of ideal reader in mind, someone who's going to be with them as they go through this text, giving them a chance to make the point they want to make or tell the story they want to tell. And if the text is a text worth reading, then it is worth trying to be that ideal reader. So as we read, some questions we might ask: what does this author assume I already know? What does this author assume I care about? Who's the ideal audience for this text? Do I need to give this text a chance? And you might ask now and then, should I resist the author's assumptions? Do they think I'm someone that I don't want to be, someone that I'm not?